कैवल्य क्लीं कैवल्य क्लीं कैवल्य क्लीं कैवल्य
Namaste and welcome to Kaivalya Yoga Gurukulam for the Kaivalya Marga classes that we have been having for the past several weeks. We are continuing to studying the earth element. Let us begin this class with 3 ohms so we get our mind into a state of mindfulness. Namaste. So I know we missed last week, the whole of last week, but nevertheless, we are back on track, hopefully, and we'll take where we left off. So what I want to do now, since we had a week's break, I just want to touch back on the last video towards which we ended, do a quick summary of what we were talking about and continue that discussion. All right. So where we were was we talked about Prithvi bringing harmony and balance. We understood that neither element, any of these 5 elements, they're not good or bad. Just because I say Prithvi is too much of Prithvi, it doesn't mean Prithvi is somehow a negative element. It is just what it is. It is an element that will anchor you, but excess of any element is going to cause imbalance in the body and hence in our very approach to life and our thoughts and everything. The 5 fingers are not equal. So it's very important to understand that all of these 5 fingers here, when I say bring them back into balance and harmony, we are not talking of bringing all the 5 elements into equalness. We have to bring them in the same harmony, in the proportion of these 5 fingers. Namah Shivaya that's why the number 5 is so important in whether you worship, whether you chant a mantra. Number 5 is a very important number because it constantly brings to your mind that we are interrelated. We are products, we are interrelated, we are intertwined, if you will, with the 5 elements. They don't exist separate of us. It seems like that. And that is why we have reduced this world and this planet to a very sorry state where we have cut down trees and we are creating the imbalance because we think they're not connected to us. And out of some weird objectives and ideas and goals, we are completely literally shooting ourselves in the foot. But that comes because of the lack of this awareness. Once we are aware that we are interconnected with the universe, with the cosmos around us, especially with this planet, then we begin to live a very mindful life. So not only then is the environment in a healthy condition, but it reflects back in health in the individual, in the family, in the community, in the nation, in the world at large. We won't have mass pandemics and all of that kind of that's perhaps happening now, which wasn't so common in the past. We spoke about Prithvi vegetables and fruits just so to educate ourselves. Because if some of us feel that these one of these elements is an imbalance, then how do we approach it from different? How do we approach it in a holistic manner, right? So one of the things we focused on in the last class was Prithvi in the form of vegetables and fruits. Which are the vegetables that are very Prithvi oriented, mostly with very less water, which is very dense. So there are many, many, many vegetables and many fruits. Some of you did respond to me. Some of you, I'm sure, did this homework for yourselves. There are Prithvi and water. We talked about fruits and vegetables where there is a lot of water in it. And of course, earth. Earth is there in every fruit and vegetable. Otherwise, they'll be invisible, correct? The fact that it's matter, there is earth. But then there is a quality in that, which is fiery in nature, like pepper, hot peppers, they are more fiery in nature, so there's fire in them. There are others which have a lot of wind element in them, like pulses and grains, and so those have dal, as we call them. So they beans, if you will, they are all gassy, and so there's a lot of prithvi and air in nature. So like this, you have each of them have a quality of prithvi in them, but there's other element also embedded. So this we will learn. I mean, as you go along, you'll learn to understand. There is no really hardcore textbook that says this is pure Prithvi or this is pure water. The reason why I threw this idea to y'all and wanted y'all to consider this is because none of these elements exist in isolation, right? So just because we understand our body, and I got some text and I want to clarify it right now. Somebody said, oh, maybe I have too much prithvi. What do I do just to reduce prithvi? You can't just reduce one element alone. You can't. It's an overall thing. So right now we have to study one element at a time. So it might seem that we are isolating them, but that's the only way we can study it, right? So when we study this earth element, then we study the water element, then you study the fire element. Eventually, when we study all of this and study a whole lifestyle that surrounds it, study mantras that have effects on different elements and so on. So then then you begin to live an enlightened lifestyle. That's the idea. So don't jump to conclusions right away after listening to a class. It points you to a certain direction. Now hold on to those thoughts, but be open for more improvement and further refinement of these ideas and perhaps change some of them. But at a particular point in time when we study an element, it might seem like we are studying it in isolation and therefore it somehow exists in isolation. No illness in the body, let me correct myself, 99% of the illness in the body is not a result of one particular element. There could be an influence of an element to a large extent, but there are other elements also causing illnesses or imbalances in the body or diseases in the body. So don't assume that it is only Prithvi, oh my gosh, this must be Prithvi. So it's not necessarily Prithvi. Hormonal imbalances have a Prithvi element in it, but there are other elements, number one. Number two is we use the element to understand the location in the body to understand the element where it is predominantly located. And to some extent, it is true that that area which is affected, let's say the stomach is affected, then there is a fire element that could be involved in influencing that imbalance in my digestion and so on. So it's not wrong, but it's not entirely right to say that's only the fire element. Okay, so we have to understand that there could be a predominant influence of one particular element, but then it is not only that element that could be causing imbalance in our body. But more importantly, rather than just focusing on the body alone, today in this class, I'm going to open up the idea of how How is Prithvi reflected in our thoughts? How is Prithvi reflected in our consciousness? How all of that actually manifests. In Hatha Yoga, we believe that the body is a reflection of the lifestyle that you lead. And you don't need a Hatha Yoga for this, right? Modern medicine also accepts that your lifestyle is reflected in your physicality, in the body. And so, but in Hatha Yoga, what you do is you go a step further and say, my thoughts also are reflected in the body. What I normally entertain, constantly reiterate my thoughts and my feelings and my consciousness, where does it revolve? If it is constantly in one particular zone, all of that begins to reflect in reality. It manifests into matter. Let's see if we have time to explore that more in detail today. So in that context, we had this short video. So let's look at this video and I'll continue into the next video. And then we will, and the next video, this one you have already seen, it's a 2-minute video, but this continues into the next one. And so I didn't want to just pop in the other one because you may not see the connection. So let's take a look at this video. How do, therefore, you and I bring this Prithvi back to balance? I'm not saying get rid of Prithvi element. We can't. We need matter. That's an important aspect of the 5 elements. How do I bring it back into balance? How do I bring the Prithvi from being so much, bring it back to balance with the other elements? That is what the spiritual path is all about. That is what the yoga path is all about. Ultimately bringing balance in these 5 elements. Believe me, my friends, if you are able to understand this secret, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om, Namah Shivaya, the 5 chakras and the Om, this is what it is. Health is just given to you. That comes incidentally. Don't worry about health. Don't worry about wealth. All of that will come. You'll be soaked in the abundance of these 5 elements because all of that will be in balance in your life in every aspect of your consciousness. Prithvi. Food. How does Prithvi come in the form of food? Think of the vegetables that you eat. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. Turnips, potatoes. Potatoes are predominantly Prithvi. So guess what happens if you eat a lot of potatoes, potato chips, potato wafers, potato. In India you have aloo parathas. You have too much of aloo, what happens? You begin to look like an aloo because there is so much of Prithvi, you begin to put on weight. Modern medicine would say too much of carbs, too much of starch and so on and so forth. They are right. But then the traditional yogi would look at it and say there is too much Prithvi in your food. Reduce Prithvi or eliminate it for the time being. So potatoes bring in a lot of Prithvi. Hard vegetables, root vegetables bring in a lot of Prithvi. Yam brings a lot of Prithvi. Sweet potato has a lot of Prithvi. There are other vegetables, and almost all the vegetables and fruits have Prithvi because there is matter, but then they're always in combination. So juicy fruits are Prithvi with water. Hot pepper and hot chili pepper and all have Prithvi, earth element with fire. Turmeric has Prithvi with air, and that's why it's very good for any kind of allergies. So that's how you have a Prithvi in other combinations. But there are some vegetables which are predominantly Prithvi. In fruits you have bananas, you have mangoes which are Prithvi with water because they are juicy in nature. So whenever there is an overdose of Prithvi and water, because both of them flow with gravity, you tend to put on weight, you tend to get diseases of the lower extremities. And we continue to the next video. Weight gain is from there. What happens with this weight gain, and when I say weight gain, it's not just physical, it slows you down, right? It slows you down physically, yes, because a heavy person is slow in his movement, her movement. But it also slows down your thinking. It slows down your thinking. You become more and more conditioned in your thought processes. And the more I become conditioned, the more I become predictable, the more it is Prithvi. Because Prithvi is matter. Matter is this. There is sculpture here in these rocks, right? It's sculptured. You know exactly how it is. But air you can't see. It's very subtle. It's moving constantly. But this Prithvi here is. So in other words, if I become predictable, if I become conditioned, if I'm deeply rooted in habitual patterns of how my bed should be, how my pillow should be, how my coffee should be, and how my tea should be, or where should I sit in which is my favorite chair in the house, and so on and so forth. We have so many things that we build on, and the more we become conditioned and predictable, then understand that we are becoming closer and closer to the Prithvi. A child, if you see, is unconditional. He likes something now, the next moment he's jumped to something else. He's not formed habits, he's not formed judgments about anything. And therefore, the Prithvi is very light, his body is very light. So if your body has to be light, if you want to feel energetic at the end of the day, think about your consciousness and eliminate anything that is Prithvi oriented. When I say eliminate, take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, balance it. Balance the Prithvi consciousness. Don't engage in judgmental thoughts. Don't engage in judgmental conversations. Because when I speak, so that is now, I covered the mouth, right? The food that goes in, I had to watch what I eat and what I drink. And the sounds that go into my ears and the sounds that come out of my mouth, I have to watch. They could be Prithvi oriented. What does that mean? Condition. If I say he is bad, he is good, oh, this is a horrible movie, or this is a horrible situation, I hate this kind of food, I can never tolerate that, or this is good, or that is bad. The good and bad judgment means it's Prithvi. It's Prithvi. When we watch most of these television serials or movies and all of that, we are reaffirming judgmental values in our subconscious mind. Remember that. And that's why it keeps you grounded, way too grounded. It not anchors you, it actually ties you down to the Prithvi element. You are unable to free yourself from this earth and think of higher realms, higher dimensions. Yoga wants to help you to break through, but merely practicing asanas is only going to give you flexibility of what? Prithvi. Definitely a great step in the right direction. But then the rest of the lifestyle, if it's very Prithvi oriented, then Prithvi becomes very big. And then Jalam, Agni, Vayu, Akasha, all that becomes very mild. And therefore the senses get bogged down. So one has to understand that in my judgment, the sounds that go into my ears, am I entertaining judgmental sounds, judgmental conversations all the time? Am I speaking things which are judgmental? Then I can understand how much of Prithvi is there in my conversations. It is the same thing with my thoughts. What kind of thoughts do I indulge? That is why when mantras are given to you, when aphorisms are constantly repeated, you break away from one condition and create a different condition of a lighter nature. So that is something for you to think about. Alright, so now we are stepping into a different arena. How does Prithvi get reflected in our thoughts? We saw that in our food, and we'll continue to see that as we go along someday when we discuss food as a separate topic in some form. We'll get more into detail, but building these little foundations will help you understand that on a much better scale. When I said physical slowness, it is generally out of three causes, right? When you're physically slow, one is age related, one is weight related, and one is laziness. So there are these three, and there is one more also because of illness, sickness. Your physicality is slowed down. In other words, you walk slowly, or you're not able to get up from bed, or in things like that. So all these are an influence of Prithvi. Anything that is physically representing, you feel it in the physical body, such as laziness. It is a reflection of the Prithvi element. There was a question that came to me, and that was, does laziness cause the balance in Prithvi element, or does our food habits cause imbalance in Prithvi element, or does the Prithvi element cause imbalance in food? It's a chicken or the egg kind of question. Both ways, it works both ways. When we are born, we are given a very clean slate, a relatively clean slate. There are occasions when there are children born with certain deformities or defects. We'll leave that outside this discussion because there is a whole different dimension to that and to this argument as well. But I'm not going to the dimension which is Vedic astrology and influence of planets and things like that. We will talk about that as separate and then bring that into all of these elements, because without those, these elements don't exist. So that's a different dimension, an important but different dimension. But I can't open that discussion because then it'll go out of control. So allow me to present that later. So we leave children being born with defects and all of that. But generally speaking, when we are born, when we are young, our body tends to heal much faster, and we are given a relatively clean slate. In other words, the body is relatively in a healthy state, and all the imbalances, all the elements are in harmony, is in balance. But then what happens? What causes imbalance? So imbalance, therefore, slowly it begins to become a little bit at a time, and then becomes more and more as we go along. And that imbalance, I believe, is caused largely because of our lifestyle. I'm going to put it broadly as lifestyle, not just food. Food, sleep, the thoughts we entertain, the belief systems, all of that, everything. Ultimately, it's, you might say, how belief system affects my physicality. Just simply think of it like this. If I believe I like ice creams, if I believe ice creams are very good and ice cream is something, wow, it's so pleasurable. If I believe that in my head, it's a belief actually, right? If I believe that in my head, then I'm going to, anytime I'm upset or depressed, I go for an ice cream. And guess what will happen if I have too much ice cream? So the belief system is eventually coming back to you and forces you to take certain actions. So belief systems, lifestyles, all of that begins to cause imbalances or brings it back into harmony and balance. So that kind of awareness, that kind of enlightened lifestyle is not being taught to us today formally, right? Because it's not, I don't know why, but it's not considered necessary. For children, if this was taught along with science and along with this, how all of this is a holistic approach to lifestyle is not taught to children, to us. And so we are now in the course of our life suddenly awakening and trying to grapple with these. So it's not going to be easy to accept, not easy to implement, not easy to bring about changes. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We should. And hopefully we'll be able to educate our children as we go along. So physical slowness comes from all of this: laziness, weight gain, illness, and age related. None of these are bad. It's just to understand that the cause for all this is earth. That's all. Okay, I'm not saying it is bad to be sick, but it is because of the imbalance, rather, it is the influence of the earth element that is finally reflected in the body. The fact that it's reflecting in the body means there's a great degree of earth involvement in that particular experience that the body is undergoing, good or bad. Prithvi. If your body is light and energetic, it just means that the Prithvi is in its right place or close to its right place. None of these are static. So once, it's not like, okay, I knocked this nail into the wall, now it's not going to move anywhere. Let me go anywhere and come back. This is going to be steady. It's not like that. It's a very fluid state. They're constantly directly reflecting. These elements are a resound, reaction, and a reflection of our lifestyle. So the moment I change, at this point, I could be very fresh and feeling healthy. But the moment I change my lifestyle, today, 3 days later, 72 hours later, it will start showing right away. It will start showing its good or bad results in my thoughts. And then slowly my thoughts get affected, my mood get affected, my feelings get affected, my physical body begins to reflect those afflictions, good or bad, either way. That's the point. The point is, just understand that these are not static states. These are not a one-time achievement of harmony and balance. This is just a lifestyle imbalance. That is why, so it is in this context that in yoga, in practice, and in a general healthy lifestyle, spiritual lifestyle, holistic lifestyle, they always say stay under control, use moderation in your life, don't go to extremes. It is one of these reasons why this was traditionally taught to us, especially in a spiritual lifestyle. One has to understand this in a very holistic manner. Coming to thoughts, it's very interesting. And you noticed I gave an example of the temple. In other words, when a physical object is in front of us, it's very clear. The 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 structure of it is very, very clear, right? That temple, the rock is carved in beautiful sculptures. There is symmetry and all of that. So all of that is very clear. Um, but then what happens is all of that is very clear. But in the course, let me get my thought together. Something went wrong technically, and that kind of distracted me. All right. So when you see a physical thing, an object in front of you, it's very clear. Is it round? You can see it and say, yes, it is round or not round. If it is triangle, you can say, yes, it's triangular in shape. It's square in shape. It's rectangular in shape, so on and so forth. But what about thoughts? Can thoughts be very structured, very rigid, and so on? So let's take a look at that, right? Thoughts. So you see a conditioned, dogmatic, judgmental mindset. Conditioned, dogmatic, judgmental mindset. It's got too much structure in it. And is that a problem? You need to consider that and ask yourself, have I made up my mind too quickly, too soon? Or is it so made up that I refuse to change? And therefore, is it good or bad? If it's good, if you're happy with it, then that's fine. But what happens is, invariably, we become very conditioned in our thinking. Our likes and dislikes as we age become very clear. I don't like garlic, I like onions, or I don't like meat, or I like meat, or I don't like this, I like that, talking about taste and food. Then I like this color, I don't like that color. It becomes very, 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 very rigid. And we constantly begin to reinforce that kind of belief. Hang on one second. Yeah, I know there is a problem with my eyes. So I'm going to just give me a second. Let me see if I can. All right. I'm sorry. That was my distraction. Something was wrong with my eyes, and Maya was passing by, took a break from her work. She said, "What is wrong with your eyes?" So I was trying to. Okay. When we begin to make up our minds, then that could hold us back from future growth. That is why even self-realization, we think at some level we might be thinking, right? In general, we might be thinking it's some goal to be achieved. God realization is a goal to be achieved. Thinking of it as some kind of a static goal at the back of our mind. That one day we're going to wake up and say, okay, I've realized God. Yes, that's it. I am not sure about that, because that is again another structure we are trying to create. And if that God realization, or whatever we call it, fits into our definition of what God realization is, then we're going to pat ourselves in the back and say, yes, I've got realized God. But what if in my path to go to God realization, my definition of God realization changes? Then I realize, oh, wait a minute. It's not this, it's something else now. So I search for that something else, and in the meantime, definition changes again, and so that change goes on. Am I open to that kind of change? That's what I mean. So that is a good side of keeping the mind flexible, open to learning. In spirituality, in the yoga path, in ancient Sanatana Dharma, it was very important. And you read that nowadays through Zen and all of this. It is very important that the mind is empty. empty mind. When you say I surrender to my guru, they don't mean that you are somehow giving your will to somebody else and somebody else is taking control of you. That is a very wrong interpretation. And I'm so I know I sound very judgmental and Prithvi like in this, but that is not the right interpretation of that. Um, the understanding of surrendering is I surrender my conditioned mindsets and my belief systems. For the time being, I'm putting it down and I'm willing to learn from you with an open mind. In other words, if I find something good in what I listen, if I find something meaningful in what I listen, if that makes sense to me at this point of time in my life and where I am from, where I'm coming from, if it makes sense to me, I'm willing to adopt that into my life. That willingness is surrender. That unconditional willingness is surrender. So, that kind of mindset is what we are aiming for to understand and grow in our meditation as a practice, in our yoga as a progress in yoga. Because that kind of a willingness in the mind to change at any minute without any conditions is what is reflected in the body as flexibility. So what do we do with yoga practices? We begin to break the rigidity of the body, right? Especially in the hip region, the ball and socket joint. We begin to open the hips, and it's not easy. It takes months and years for that to happen. But the very fact that you're attempting begins to break loose the rigid structure of your body, and that rigidity has settled in because of the rigidity in your mind and the crystallization of the earth element. The more solid it has become in your body, the more rigid you have become, the more rigid your thoughts are, the more rigid your body begins to reflect that rigidity. And therefore, in yoga, even though traditionally there were only 84 asanas, but those 84 asanas were more than enough. You didn't need hundreds of asanas that we practice today. Most of them is, when we say hundreds of asanas today, just FYI, is more of variations on the same asana. And that's okay. But we don't need it, and it's okay even if you have it. But those 84 asanas, in fact 12 or 20 asanas, are enough to break the rigidity of the body. When you have clay, when the clay is wet, then you can mold the clay into any shape you want, right? But if the clay is dry, it's still the clay. You can't do anything with it. In fact, you try to do it, it breaks. It breaks. So once you've made up your mind about something, you can't learn. So once you say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in all this, I don't care. So the moment you said that, then you are. That's it, period. You stop learning. Once you say, I'm a theist, I believe in God, I'm ready to learn, that also stops you from learning. Once you say, I am this is my belief, then you stop learning. Keep your mind open. Because people ask me very often, and in this context, I'm saying when we make up our mind about something, and I'm learning too, please trust me. I am learning too, because it is so inherent in us. Prithvi is a powerful element that holds you back. So in our thoughts, we are very quick to form judgments of many kind, not just moral judgments of good and bad, but likes and dislikes and all of that, right? What is comfortable, what is uncomfortable, what do we mean by praise and blame, what we treat as criticism, non-criticism, all of that. Everything is judgmental in our mind. People often ask me, we hear you call Sai Baba as your Satguru, whereas there are millions of people who think he's God walking on earth. Why don't you call him God? And my answer to that is, because I am keeping my definition of God very open. The moment I say he is God, she is God, or that is God, this is God, then my definition of God is restricted to that. Period. I'm done. I feel that then I limit my idea of what God is or what divinity is. But I can relate to Sai Baba as my teacher, a teacher who teaches me the truth, who represents truth. He's everything to me as a Sadguru. And that's good enough for me. And for me, that's Sadguru, Satguru, the embodiment of the very truth that I'm searching for. So he's the very essence in every part in my body, and that's good enough for me. But to label, to me, God is also a label. When we label something, then we stop learning from that source. We create, if we think God is, oh my God, God is so great, God is beyond all of this, I cannot even understand God, Sai Baba is God. Then what I'm telling up to my mind is Sai Baba is far out, somewhere great, who am I? I'm nobody, I'm nowhere close to him. That is what I'm training myself. Because of my definition of what God is, I've labeled something as God. Now that God has gone into that definition. If that definition is somewhere far above me, somewhere far away from me, somewhere mysterious, and therefore I am who I am. So that labeling comes back to us, and then Prithvi holds us back. Like, good for you. Keep doing that. It is in that context that Vedanta does not define what God is. Vedanta doesn't define what God is. In fact, in traditional Sankhya philosophy, they don't even bring in the concept of Ishvara. Patanjali does. When we study Yoga Sutras, we'll talk about how he, as a Sankhya philosopher, as a proponent of Sankhya, he brings in the concept of Ishvara. How he explains Ishvara, we'll understand that when we study Yoga Sutras. But understand that the highest form of Samadhi is not explained. It is just said that it is not the lower forms of Samadhi. That is how it is said. Asamprajnata Samadhi. A nirvikalpa Samadhi. That means the highest form of Samadhi is without any modifications. But what is that? What do you mean by without any modification? That is not defined, because you cannot define it. So take that principle which we apply to God and divinity, take that into our everyday life. The moment I put my finger onto something, I label something, somebody, some circumstance, anything, then that circumstance, that person immediately gets reduced to that label. And the more I keep labeling that again and again and again, that begins to manifest into reality. That becomes my reality. So conditioned mindset, dogmatic. This is what Vedanta frowns upon. Blind beliefs. They frown upon blind belief. Find out what the reason is. Find out, examine. It might be a weird reason, but nobody else might. But if it appeals to your heart, you can. But find out. It has to make sense to you. Don't just do it because everybody else is doing it. Dogmatism. Judgmental mindset. If there is too much structure, if there is too much planning, for example, then the action becomes, you're very hesitant about the action. For example, let's say we want to plan a trip to India, and 20 of you all come to me and say, let's all go to India. And I'll say, all right, let's sit and plan. And we plan, we say, oh, okay, which time is good? Oh, but that's a rainy season. Now, if we go to India, it'll be raining. What if we land in Bombay, and what if it rains? What are our backup plans? And this and that. And we compare and weigh all the pros and cons. And finally, we say, oh, you know what, maybe this is not the time. Maybe let's see we'll see in some other time. And we put it out. So what happened to action now? Action didn't happen because too much planning, too much structure held you back from execution. So is it wrong to plan? No, it's not wrong to plan. But there is also a joy in risk taking. There are certain things which are beyond our control, and it should not stop you from doing what you can do. So there you go into this stepping out into the unknown is action. That's why when you do worship, when you do puja in Sanatana Dharma, some of the Vedantists today, some of the Vedic scholars look down upon it, and I disagree with them only because when you do that puja, when you're offering that, you're doing actions which are breaking the conditioned mindset. What am I doing with a stone idol in front of me? What am I doing talking to it? What am I making this come alive? What does that even mean? But that's the whole idea. Break through that conditioned mindset. Bring divinity into that piece of stone. Suddenly that stone comes to life. So now the mind, instead of thinking stone is stone, cloth is cloth, wood is wood, right? Now suddenly you see life in a stone. Where else can you see that if not in a worship session? So that breaks the conditionality of the mind. And therefore, the Prithvi element gets challenged. It becomes flexible. So, worship is a very powerful way of bringing Prithvi back into balance. Worship without a dogmatic attitude. Worship without a dogmatic attitude. Worship without a dogmatic attitude. What does that mean? Allow your feelings to guide you. You don't have to follow a dogmatic pattern. You can use it as a reference point. But oh my God, I don't have mango leaves. What do I do? Will this God get angry with me? So you run across, you order mango leaves from somewhere and bring it and tie it just because it has to be done. Now that's dogmatic. Then all this effort from your for this Prithvi thing gets transformed into just pure earth element. Instead of getting loose, you get more, the earth element becomes strong. Same act can actually make the earth element more imbalanced. The same act can free you from the earth element. So two people can be worshipping a Shivalinga, the Shiva idol in front of them. One can be completely from a non-dogmatic point of view. In other words, devotion is ruling his heart, her heart. And the other one who's worried about what could I go wrong? Should I pour milk first? Then should I do curds? Oh my God, I poured too much water, this, that. And they're caught up in that and doing the same ritual. Now you can understand in whose case Prithvi will be more imbalanced and whose case Prithvi will come back into harmony and balance. Because in one, the Prithvi is actually becoming like a clay back again. Because the mind is opening to feeling. They are seeing life in that. That is the beauty. That is why in Ekambareshwar temple, when Parvati builds a lingam out of sand, when it is easier to build it, carve it out of a piece of rock, she builds it out of sand. She breaks through that conditioned mindset, goes back into that atoms and molecules of the Prithvi and rebuilds reality for her. She rebuilds the Shiva consciousness from the atoms and molecules the way she likes it. It's conical in shape. There's no lingam like that anywhere in the world except in Ekambareshwar temple. And there is one other temple which has a similar looking lingam. But nevertheless, this is made of earth, sand, right? So she builds something nobody else has done. So did Parvati go wrong? No. That is because this is how she related to her Shiva. Think about that. Think about it. And it is in this manner that we begin to examine, why am I saying that a particular dish I don't like and it's bad or it's too bitter for me? Why can't I just open my mind and try it? You are actually practicing spirituality in every aspect of your life if you challenge these conditioned mindset. Challenge it. So you might ask now, what if somebody does something wrong? Should I just sit back and say I shouldn't judge? No. You can condemn that act, but not that person. That's not judging. You can be critical about the act. For example, as I said, that some people have misunderstood the term surrender and they would say surrender is what? That's nonsense. I have my own intelligence. Why should I surrender myself to some other guru? Now that's a wrong approach. That person is not bad for making that. The idea is already made up his mind about what surrender is. No, surrender is actually becoming unconditional. So I correct that idea. I'm critical about the idea, but I don't judge that person as, oh my God, this guy is too materialistic. He is too proud. He doesn't understand. I'm not more interested about that person who said this. I am more focused on the concept. That is why you can be critical about your children's action, but don't criticize them, don't judge them. I've learned this, and many of you in my generation perhaps could relate to this. When I would do something, my mother or my father would say, in Tamil, எப்போ பார்த்தாலும் நீ இப்படி தான் பண்ணுவ. Any time we see you are like this only. You are always going to be like this. You are always lazy, or you are never good in studies. How many times do we have to tell you are never good in studies? Now, this kind of brainwashing that happens in a child, that is like constant people judging them, right? And so then I would go to my uncle's place. My uncle say, "Why are you not like your cousin? Huh? Why are you not studying like him? Why are you so lazy? You should also study. Be like him. Be like him." So now I am again being judged. That is very detrimental. Thanks to me, I found a Sai Baba who helped me redefine myself, rediscover myself. But otherwise, I could have been just like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not good enough because I was told I'm not good enough. I might have not studied well. So instead of encouraging me to study well, I was judged as not being able to study well. So remember, there are two important things here. So don't judge somebody, especially children, because you could be actually harming them. You could be critical about people's actions. Somebody says, "Am I singing well?" You are not judging that person. You can say, "Yeah, I think this song perhaps didn't suit your voice. I think your voice could suit the other bhajan that you sang the other day, or the other songs that you sing of, I think a little more I could tune in." Or you could just say, "Somehow I just couldn't tune into your voice today." It's nothing to do with the person in front. If they say, "No, you're not a good singer," then you're judging the person. You're limiting that person's capability of improving himself or herself, because you have said, "No, no, no, music is not for you." That is judgment. Now that comes back, if that person doesn't accept it, then it comes back to you, and that judgmental attitude becomes more and more evident, and all of that begins to reflect as Prithvi imbalance. So Prithvi and sound is a very, very important, earth and space, very important combination that can bind us or that can liberate us. When we understand the Akasha energy, the sound energy, we will get a full, complete picture of this. But it wouldn't be out of place for me to emphasize this one important fact here. And that is, how do we understand as creation, Akasha? In Sankhya, if you go back to that chart, that famous chart, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm sure you recollect, in the Tanmatra section, in the Panchabhuta section, the first one that came was space. And then comes air, then comes fire, then comes water, then comes earth. So whatever is created in space slowly materializes and comes and settles down into matter. That is why when you dig into an atom, you go in and you find nothing but 99.99999% empty space. It's from space, everything. Space is the first container, the most subtle. Whatever we entertain in space, what is space here? Sound. Whatever sound that we entertain in space that enters through the eardrums, whatever sound we entertain that goes out through the mouth, that what goes out through the mouth comes into the ear as well. Remember that, right? If I can't hear properly, I won't be able to speak properly. So what I am speaking goes into my ear, what others are speaking goes into my ear. So ears are considered more for sound. Whatever sound goes into my ear, if I entertain them, then they manifest themselves into reality. Period. Now you might say, "Oh my gosh, and every thought that I pass, does it going to become reality? Every movie that I have seen, oh my gosh." No, it's not. Don't get paranoid. It's not. I'm glad it's not that way. When we reiterate it again and again and again, then that becomes real. Not just one fleeting moment. It doesn't happen again. That is why you and I have a certain idea of what comedy should be. If somebody is saying something or doing something that doesn't fit into our definition of comedy, then we were like, I don't know, then find it funny. But a 5-year-old will be rolling in the ground, clutching his stomach and laughing because all he saw was this joker, the clownish face, doing something dumb and silly, which we consider dumb and silly. But when we were 5 years old, we found that funny. Because our definition of what comedy should be, what is funny and what is not, has changed. Why can't we go back to being a 5-year-old? And I'm sure many parents, as parents, you probably understand. We're not parents, we didn't. But with my niece and nephew, I've said this earlier as well. When we become that 5-year-old and 10-year-old and 3-year-old, Then we begin to laugh like them, behave silly like them, and we begin to get a peep into that world which we miss so much. That is why if you see the bodies of children, they are very light. They are very light. And it is only if today if there's obesity in children is mainly because of food habits. But children are very light in their nature because their mind is not made up about anything. They are willing to learn, willing to learn, willing to learn. So rather than carving our belief system into them, rather than chiseling our faith into them, we allow them to discover their own belief system, their own faith. We just provide a protective, rich soil, if you will, and let them discover their own self. That is what the ancient Gurukulams were about. That is how the ancient teachings were about. That is what I discovered in Puttaparthi, in Sai Baba's ashram when I lived there 15 years. I got a chance to rediscover myself. Sai Baba gave me a chance to write plays. I discovered a passion for writing a play. He gave me a chance to act in the dramas. He gave me a chance to come up with gymnastics and sports and do physical things like yoga on the rope and so on and so forth. Everywhere he pushed me and made me explore that possibility. Instead of telling me, no, no, you can't do this, you have already done that, you can't do this, you're only good in that. He never told me that. Never. He said, oh, yeah, good, good, good. And occasionally he will say, this time we'll do that, but it'll be good. This is how he'll say. కొత్తగా ఏమేం చేస్తే బాగుంటుందో ఏమో అనుకుంటున్నాను. In other words, I feel that if you present something in a new manner, it might be a little better. Let's not repeat the same thing. What do you think? He'll just put that suggestion in us. Then we'll be like, oh yes, let's think something new. So he opened the doors to creative thinking. He never let us be, oh, very good, do the same thing like you did last time. No, very good last time. Now this year, what are y'all are doing? What programs are you coming up with? Oh, same thing, huh? How about something a little more different? Can you think something like that? That's all we needed. That is my point, is that really helped me not to form any conditions about anything. It has not been always very helpful for me, I must be very honest, because I'm open to every single idea that got me into trouble. But for the most part, it keeps me young. For the most part, it keeps me young. It keeps me non-judgmental. It keeps me wanting to learn. And somewhere within me, seems to be, in my heart, I know, that there is this child very innocently waiting to explore, still looking at life in a very magical way, thinking everything has got its own charm to it, including pain has got its own charm to it. And I'm grateful for that. And I owe that to my yoga practice. So in yoga practice, when you do that, you begin to bring all these ideas that I'm talking to you into reality. Because when you work with the body, you are rebringing movement in the body, rebringing, I don't know if that's right term. You are recreating movement in the rigid parts of the body, bringing flexibility, quote unquote flexibility. And that flexibility is very relative, right? You and I can bend down to touch our feet. You might be 70 years old, I'm 60 years old. There might be somebody next to me 30 years old, and there might be a little one there 20 or 10 years old, and we try to touch our feet. Each one will be doing, it looked very different. The one who's 70 plus year old can barely go up to the knees. I could perhaps touch my toes. And the other 2 or 3 next to my right can go all the way down, can flatten their chest to their thighs and then stick their body. So is one more flexible than the other? Does it mean that one's Prithvi is more balanced than the other? Don't make that mistake. Flexibility is relative. The fact that this person next to me, the older man, the older woman, the next to me, is creating flexibility in their body is good enough for that earth. Once the earth starts moving is all that we need. Break through that rigidity. Don't say I cannot. The word I can't means you're very rigid in your mind. Moment we hear the word yoga, for example, I hear people say, oh, the yoga is not for me at all. I can never do yoga. I don't want to even go in that direction. I'm like, okay, that's your decision. But what does that mean? You're made up your mind. I'm not saying you should go into yoga, but I am saying if you make up your mind about something and say, I can't, that is not for me, then you have closed that door completely. So when you create flexibility in your body, in other words, when you practice yoga asanas, you begin to create that rigidity, you break through that rigidity, and all of that begins to bring balance into your body. The earth element, which is so rigid, begins loose. And then kriyas are other things that invoke fire element and so on. So along with the bandhas and all of this, we'll learn about the Mula Bandha in the next class or the class after this, because we're still on Prithvi. And we'll understand why that is so important to turn the direction of the Prithvi upwards. Prithvi is following gravity, right? Matter is heavy, so it goes with gravity down. So a consciousness, when it gets entangled, enmeshed, entwined with Prithvi element, it begins to go down because it becomes Prithvi. How do we make Prithvi itself go up? How do we make the Prithvi element in our body itself go up? So there are practices in yoga which help us understand this element. And Mula Bandha is one of them. So we learn that. We're already doing that slowly for those of us who are practicing yoga, either the beginners class, intermediate class. All of that is the intermediate and beginners only from a physical flexibility point of view, strength and balance point of view. But in all of these yoga classes, we already begin to learning this breaking the rigidity of the earth element. It is very important. And therefore, we need to watch our words, our actions, and our thoughts. So we talked about all of this today. I had some more slides, but I guess, like I said earlier, this will be slow, and I'm going to allow the universe to guide me. I want to feel happy that I covered this in detail, so you could always refer back to these lessons, and hopefully, it has opened up new avenues of thoughts in your consciousness, because we have to really begin to appreciate the fact that Prithvi exists in my thought, Prithvi exists in my food. And then in the next class, we'll examine how Prithvi exists through other senses, like in taste. How does it exist in smell? How does it exist in the air element inside us? How does it exist in the fire element inside us? And therefore, now that I know it exists, now I can bring it into balance. Like I said, Prithvi element is not bad at all. You absolutely need the Prithvi element. So when we practice asanas and physical exercises, they are working with the body, but never get into one pattern. If you see my classes, in the beginners classes, I'm being very slow. I'm being more safe from a safety point of view. I'm sticking to the same routine. But over a period of time, I'm hoping to do at least 100 plus classes. I have a particular figure in my mind, but I'm not going to mention that. Let the universe make it happen. But as we go along, we come into the mat and we allow ourselves to be guided. We don't come with a rigid idea of this is the asanas I'm going to do. We're going to do an asana and see how it leads into another one. So we are not touched that in the beginners class yet. It will take a while before we get there. But the intermediate classes we are building. So over a period of time, we'll build a database of exercises. Then every day we'll just pick up a few and practice, not preconditioned again, not predetermined, coming to the mat and allowing the energy to guide and you flow, knowing the safety and the flow of the prana and so on. All of this will fall into place. But what's my point here? My point here is the moment you stick to a particular routine, this Prithvi element stops acting. In other words, stop getting activated. In other words, if I say, I'm going for 2 kilometers walk every day, the first 1 week, excellent. The body is ready, the body is responding, you're perhaps losing a couple of pounds, you feel energetic, you feel nice. And if you're doing that for a year, and you're very strict and very rigid about it, okay, it's all good. So I'm going for walk 2 kilometers a day. Every day I'm going for walk 2 kilometers a day. What happens after a while? The body reaches a plateau. So the body can do 2 kilometers. You're not challenging the body to do more. So you are just sticking to the same old. The body reaches a plateau and that's it. So beyond a particular point, there is no other benefit from that exercise. You won't get any other benefit. I've had friends who would go for running regularly, and everything else remains the same. The running practice remains the same, and then one of them recently had a heart attack. Question was why? I mean, he was running regularly and everything was there. How could he have that? The problem is this: after a point, the body reaches a plateau. The benefit of that particular exercise doesn't come anymore. Why? Because you're not challenging the body, you're not surprising the body into new movements. It is constantly the same. Legs are going just like this. You're not opening the hip, you're not doing anything. So the Prithvi becomes more rigid. And then added, of course, is all the other things: condition, mindset, blah, 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 food, and all as one side. But exercise alone, and that too rigid exercise, a particular fixed routine in your chart that you're going to follow every day, is got a very, very, very small benefit for breaking that. That is why in yoga, what happens is you constantly challenge the body into different postures. Some of them you like, some of them you will just not like. Some of them you think you can easily, some of them you find it very difficult. But then the fact that you're attempting to do it, and you're breaking that judgment, why am I resisting that asana? Let me break away from this judgment. Let me practice this pose. The more I do that, my Prithvi element becomes loose. Trust me, my dear friends, brothers, sisters, all of this results in health. This is why I said once we learn the balancing, the secret of balancing the elements, health is just given to us. It's given to us. And all the other things that we are so desperately seeking in life and putting as priority, all of that will be given to us in platters. So once we understand that we are interconnected to this cosmic energy, then we open our consciousness and we begin to receive without any condition mindset. Thank you for your patience. We'll meet again the day after tomorrow. That's Friday. And we'll continue the discussion on Prithvi. I hope you found this class useful. Let me end this class with one Om and three Shantis as always. Thank you for inviting me into your home and giving me your ears. As always, your feedback, your comments, questions, if any, are welcome. Let me see. I think I have that slide. Let me go back to that slide. There you go. That's my number. Send me a WhatsApp. I'm not available for calls, unfortunately. But you can send me your first name and last name if this is the first time you're texting me. Please send me a question and say, I'm interested to know what is going on, how you receive these thoughts. I may not be able to answer all of them, but at least it gives me a feedback. And let's see how the universe guides us. I always believe we learn together, and sharing our perspectives, we help each other finding our true self. Let's end this class with one moment, three Shantis. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.